Listen, we wanted to start this podcast. I had a little idea, and I'm kind of springing this on you, I know, but I would like to talk a little bit about the expression half asleep. Now, this does pertain to gates, so all of you guys who are already fading away, this is actually pretty cool stuff. So, let me tell you a little something here. This is actually borrowed from one of my favorite podcasts called Radiolab, and I'm going to kind of take our own little spin on this, and it's on sleep. Marine mammals such as whales and dolphins spend their entire lives at sea. No kidding. So how can they sleep and not drowned? These animals have to sleep as well. Have any thoughts, Ivo? A lot of people haven't thought of this. They're actually conscious breathers. They have to choose to breach to the surface in order to breathe, or they die. So they do.
Well, some animals do. Not all, like fishes and stuff, but certainly mammals do.
Oh, mammals, yes. So two basic methods of sleeping well, actually there's three. They either rest quietly in the water, vertically or horizontally. They may sleep while swimming slowly next to another animal, such as in the whales. The smaller whale will, the baby whale, for the first several weeks will actually just sit along in the slipstream of the mother. So the mother actually cannot sleep truly. We're going to get on that in just a minute. For the first few weeks of the baby's life, otherwise the baby will actually sink. So it's actually pretty cool. But the other way is that they can actually go half asleep at night. And so they actually sleep a third of the day. So they're sleeping about as much as we do, about 8 hours a day. And it's actually called logging, Logging, because in the state, the dolphins kind of look like they're floating along on the surface of the water, almost like they're napping. And they call this unihemispheric sleep. Half of the brain, actually, they found in EMG that half of the brain of the dolphin is actually asleep, while the other half is kind of in this dozing, wakeful nap, when you're kind of in that I'm almost asleep, I'm almost awake type scenario. That's what the other side of the brain is in this state. So this kind of half wakeful state. And so the half wakeful state basically allows the brain to stay on. And so in fact what happens is half the brain shuts down along with the opposite eye. So you've got one eye and half the brain on, so that they can kind of maintain enough awakening so that they can breach to the surface to gain a breath, and then they kind of will log roll again. But the other eye is supposed to stay on also for, predator watch and whatnot. So it's really pretty kind of cool. And the EEG readings showed that they actually spend about 8 hours a day. Now humans, of course, they can breathe while the mind is asleep. Our subconscious mechanisms have, control over this involuntary system. I'm sure you can elaborate on that a little bit. But we're kind of equipped with this voluntary respiratory system where whales and dolphins must keep part of the brain alert to trigger each breath because they're in the water. So, any comments before I go on?
What would you like me to comment on?
No, I don't know. I mean, kind of like the thought of, is this kind of a system still available in humans? Is this something that we've suppressed? I mean, can you actually fall asleep in a bathtub and drown?
Sure.
Yeah. So.
I mean, you hear about people doing that. A lot of rock stars
yeah.
fall asleep in bathtubs and drown, so.
Well, what's kind of interesting here is that, here's another neat little tidbit. It's actually rare for marine mammals to drown, as they won't inhale underwater, but they do suffocate from a lack of air if they get trapped under ice flow, etc. Being born underwater can cause problems for newborn whale or dolphin calves. It's the touch of air on the skin which triggers that first crucial breath. So this brings up a bigger question, and I've asked a lot of my patients this. Have you ever noticed that your first night sleep in a new house or in a friend's house, or particularly like in a new hotel room for the first night, do you ever notice that you don't sleep as well? Has that ever happened to you?
Definitely. It happens all the time, especially when I'm traveling,
lecturing,
going to hotels, that kind of stuff.
Well, some of the thoughts are, some of these studies, and I'll talk about them in just a minute, is that this may be a representation of this suppressed predator mechanism that a lot of the animals have. Ducks, will sleep in a row, and the ducks on the end of the row will have an eye open and be half asleep, while the ducks in the middle get a full night's sleep, and then they kind of switch around. But birds do this too. But what about in humans? And that brings up the big topic that I wanted to talk about here. Sleepwalking. Are we really awake? Is half the brain awake in our case? So is this something we really suppress from a predator mechanism, or is there something a little bit more going on? So, have anything you want to comment on before I talk about a couple of these studies?
Well, sleepwalking, also known as somnambulism, which is a parasomnia, which means that it's a disorder that occurs adjacent to or along with sleep, and it can be unwanted verbal activity, motor activity, etc. It can be any number of different things, and they can be either primary disorders, which are due to problems, arising from a part of the brain called the hypothalamus, which and portions of the brainstem which they believe are involved with that, or secondary to disease states. And they're not considered really pathologies of the CNS themselves, but rather a response to CNF activation that refers or causes this confusion between sleep-wake cycles. We have this series of sleep cycles that occurs during the night. They are about 45 to 50 minutes in kids. That increases to about 90 minutes per cycle in adults. They're called hypnic cycles, and they go on throughout the entire night. And it's the interruption of these hypnic cycles, or this interruption or confusion of these cycles, that causes the problem. The disorders can occur during REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, where we're dreaming, non-REM sleep, or just adjacent to that and not associated with either one. So it can be any one of those three. But the parasomnias, there's other disorders obviously, but sleepwalking falls into that category, and it's believed it can be due to an abnormal response somewhere in the paratubular processes, or paramammillary processes, which occur in the area of the hypothalamus, area of processing in the brain.
There's some neuro for you folks. This guy's too smart. One of the articles actually called these people turned it nocturnal wanderers, and it actually occurs in about 29% of the population. So the lifetime prevalence of this is actually pretty high. And, as you said, these are kind of like sleep-related abnormal behaviors. And this one study out of, 2010 Psychological Neuropsychiatric Vele, it looks like a French study, 2010. And they actually mentioned that patients with non-REM sleep parasomnias are confused, eyes open, glazed look during their nocturnal behaviors. They have
you have a lot of people that I know that are like that all the time.
They have a post-episode amnesia, so there's some memory-related issues there. But they shout and can bolt from the bed. They're often called night terrors. But during parasomnia, the study said that the brain is actually partially awake. So just like our dolphins and some of our other mammals. Enough to perform complex motor and verbal action, and partially asleep. So the brain's partially awake and partially asleep without conscious awareness or responsibility. Ooh, partial responsibility.
Sleep without guilt.
Yeah, sleep without guilt. But, also these people, there's people that actually will have sex in their sleep. There's people who have been found running. People going to stores.
If you've ever been to an ultra marathon, you see a lot of people.
Well, and that's kind of what stirred this. I listened to this podcast and I thought, what do people do in these ultra marathons? That last for days. These people.
Well, the ultras generally are like 100-milers, and usually they have a cutoff time somewhere between 24 and 48 hours.
But I was wondering, could these people actually go into this? And this is what stirred this question in me. So I did some research. Could these folks actually turn off half their brain and kind of get into this zone state where they're kind of dozing off, where the other half of the brain is just going through this automatized gait cycle that's, working on the kind of brainstem, if you will?
Well, maybe not. It should be mentioned, too, though, that parasomnias are much more common in children than they are in adults. And kids tend to enter shortwave sleep patterns much earlier in their sleep cycle. Usually the first 2 hypnic cycles of the evening will cause them to enter into this, and they fall into the deepest sleep, believe it or not, within 15 minutes of falling asleep. And that's why when a little kid falls asleep, a lot of times you can pick them up, throw them over your shoulder, do whatever you need to do, moving them around, and you're not going to wake them up because they're in this deep sleep state. And it's the interruption of that causes these parasomnias and somnambulism.
Apparently it happens to the mother and the father too.
Yes, it does. You become quite sleep deprived. If you'd ever like to borrow my children for a week or so, just let me know.
I'll pass.
I'm happy to fly them out there for you.
I'll pass. You can send them out here for night mission training or something when they're older, in the back.
You'll teach them all kinds of bad habits. You'll have them smoking cigars.
That's right. Hey, here was an article in Neuroscientist magazine 2012. It says, sleep locally, act globally. Here was the abstract. We'll just read it, and then we're going to move on with the pod. In most animals, sleep is considered a global brain and behavioral state. However, recent intercortical recordings have shown that aspects of non-rapid eye movement, sleep, and wakefulness can occur simultaneously in different parts of the cortex in mammals, including humans. Paradoxically, however, non-REM sleep still manifests as a global behavioral shutdown. So in this study, they basically reviewed the paradox on both sides of this, but it was really pretty interesting that they're basically coming to the point where humans do this too, and we have learned to suppress it because we're not so predator-driven to protect ourselves from that. We live in houses, we've got police, a lot of the predation things that normally animals can't get away from, we have found a way to, we've got security systems, we've got guns and knives, and, so we learned to suppress some of this, but in some of these parasomnias, these sleep disorders, it's still evident that this is something that we may have evolutionarily suppressed. So very cool. All right,
cool
man.
Stuff.
You know what time it is, right?
It is time for the music. Let the music play.
Cue up the band.